Here I've stacked up as many of the elites as possible so that I could show off just how much damage this can do at once. So let's go ahead and jump in here, applying the rabies, putting the hurricane up, and then we don't even need to really use the defensive with debilitating roar. Everything is just going to melt, but we use it just to be safe. There's nothing more satisfying than just tearing through numerous enemies, whether this be at a Helltide or one of the seasonal events, using a single button in builds like Stormclaw. The intention of this video was actually to show off the new gauntlets, paingorger's gauntlets, and these are unique that basically add some AoE damage and then allows you to explode it, and we'll take a look at those in just a minute. However, what occurred was the build actually became incredibly successful and very powerful, as you see there. It adds a ton of AoE damage to this build that otherwise lacked it in certain occasions. Paingorger's Gauntlets has a pretty simple concept: attack enemies with a non-basic skill, and more specifically damage the enemies. It doesn't need to be direct damage, so the damage that's spread through rabies can actually affect this as well. Then, when a basic skill first hits a marked enemy, the skill will echo to all marked enemies, dealing additional increased damage. This essentially makes it perfect for rabies, right? You're going to infect one enemy, allow it to spread. Also makes this very good for abilities that hit multiple targets at once, like Hurricane. So those are the big changes that we've made to a Stormclaw build this season, and you'll see here I'm going to pop Hurricane, all these enemies are going to be marked, and then I can simply just swipe and everything's going to take that echoed damage. Really improves the clear speed pretty dramatically for this particular build. Another common complaint of Stormclaw is that you have to go through and actually individually hit every enemy that you're trying to get through, and right now I'm doing this on purpose, but you see the damage is pretty slow when I just simply claw. However, by adding in rabies, you can allow that to spread. Also have some survivability tools as well, but you can see once you ramp up that damage with just the rabies, the enemies start to really dramatically take more damage. Hurricane itself may seem lackluster, but again, when we activate this ability, spread that mark around, we can then start echoing and amplifying the damage that it deals. Same thing with rabies, and rabies is incredibly powerful this season, especially when paired with the new virulent aspect, and I'll show you that in just a second so I don't get overwhelmed here. Now, whether you're using Hurricane or even rabies really doesn't matter. It has the same effect. It just allows us to have two abilities that can both proc those Paingorger's Gauntlets. In order for rabies to have the effect we want to make sure that we have virulent aspect equipped. This can allow rabies to infect a target more quickly. It's not necessary, but it will dramatically reduce the cooldown of rabies, allowing you to essentially do this every time you reach a new pack. Blood Howl will remain in the build, and this is going to have a reduced cooldown every time you kill an enemy. Perfect for this build since we're clearing so much trash so quickly, and on top of that, it gives us a self-heal and a boost to attack speed. Just fantastic for this build overall. Earthen Bulwark is basically your survival tool. This can provide unstoppable, and it's going to allow you just to get some added survivability through the barrier. You really want to make sure that you reserve this in case you're crowd controlled or in the rare chances that you're actually going to die. You do still have some health regen in this version of the build, however not nearly the same amount that you had in say Season 2 with Vampiric Powers, if you're familiar with that. Here we've got the objective to slay all the enemies, and this is pretty perfect for showing off this build, which is the reason why I selected this particular dungeon. And as you can see, you can certainly use more than one ability at once in terms of your damage output, and that's just going to add to the clear speed. Repeatedly pop rabies for additional poison damage, and overall the clear speed of this build is very good, much better than it had before. However, without Vampiric Powers, you are going to lack a little bit in the survivability. Don't underestimate rabies paired with that virulent aspect during the leveling process, or even as you enter endgame. As you can see, it's just going to spread to basically every enemy, the cooldown is going to immediately be up, and you can just repeat the process to take everything down. As mentioned, this is incredibly fast. You can pop one or more cooldowns in order to nuke packs, or you can conserve them for the following pack. One of the biggest hindrances of previous Stormclaw builds was that you had to stop and essentially hit every enemy that you passed. With this build, you can simply apply your rabies, and a lot of these enemies are going to die as you run further along in the dungeon. That allows you to stop simply for the elite packs if you choose, leaving everything behind you, essentially to just die as it chases after you. And simply by doing this, you can essentially run through the dungeon, using your other cooldowns or defensive cooldowns when necessary. I can show this off while running around in a circle within one room, however the idea here would be that you continue to progress through the dungeon. In practice, this would look something like this. Rabies a mob, that's going to spread to everything, and you can continually cast this as they chase after you, and simply evade or just run around using your movement speed, and all these enemies that are trailing you are dying along the way. This makes it super efficient. Final skill on the loadout is Debilitating Roar, and this is going to shift you into a werebear. This is important for certain parts of the build. It's actually going to increase your maximum health. That's just a nice bonus when you're looking for that defensive cooldown. There are some variants that you can use in the build in order to make that remain in a werewolf form, and some other abilities you could swap in as well. We're not using an ultimate in this particular version, but Cataclysm is a popular choice to put in place instead of Hurricane or even Rabies. Similar to other builds, you'll want a Great Staff of the Crone in order to bring a Stormclaw build online. This isn't 100% mandatory, but it will certainly amplify the power that a Stormclaw build has. As mentioned previously, we're using paingorger's gauntlets, and this is marking all the enemies as long as we deal damage to them, and then it's exploding or echoing to all the enemies around them. It essentially infinitely scales the amount of damage you can do by the number of targets available. Mad Wolf's Glee is going to increase the ranks that you get on your werewolf skills. This is going to dramatically increase our damage as it's directly affecting the rank of our claw. Combine that with Storm Shifter's aspect, which is going to give us +2 ranks while Hurricane is active. That means you can actually push your claw towards rank 20 if you have all properly and best rolled items. Virulent aspect, as mentioned before, is going to allow your rabies cooldown to come up more frequently. That way you can just apply rabies, tag the enemies along, let them run in a chain, and die as they follow you. Juggernaut's aspect has proven really strong. This is going to increase the cooldown of your evade, but at the benefit of a tremendous amount of armor. I really recommend this if you haven't tried it yet, whether it's this build or another build that you're working on. Rapid aspect, pretty much a staple of any Stormclaw build. You just want the additional attack speed. Putting this in the amulet slot is going to give you some additional boost as well. Runeworker's aspect, this is going to give some additional AoE damage in the form of lightning. To be honest, I'm considering swapping this out, or at least experimenting with other aspects, since the AoE provided through the rabies and hurricane seem to be pretty sufficient. Aspect of adaptability is also a huge boost to our damage output. The reason for this is because our basic attacks dealing more damage means that damage is then echoed through the paingorger's gauntlets. A lot of these aspects are flexible, and as you can see here, I'm still tinkering with the build a little bit, and we'll keep it updated as well. Quickly, I want to mention that this build is actually better on controller than it is on keyboard and mouse, and that's because you can see that I can simply move and continue to swipe or claw repeatedly, and this makes this build incredibly effective. A single button gets boring, so we are of course going to use the remainder of our abilities, but let's take a look at how this works on keyboard as well. Again, it's perfectly viable and you won't have any difficulty doing it, but you need to claw, and you'll be stuck here if you're holding the mouse. What you need to do is actually release the claw in order to move and continue in that direction swiping. I'd just like to point that out in case you play on controller, whether that be for mobile or even a console version. Keep that in mind. And there's also a lot of people saying that the vault traps are actually easier to navigate when playing on controller this season as well. All the information regarding the build in terms of paragon points, skill trees, all the aspects, all this information I always find easier to digest on a build link, so I'll leave that in the video description. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.